Okay, I grew up on a farm just immediately north of Two Rivers, about a mile out from 45th Street. And I grew up on this farm and my dad's farm and in the 30s and the 40s. And I was on the field in the spring of 1946. And I was working the land for spring seeding. And that spring, I was immediately following World War II. So that had released some heavy equipment that Strew Construction, a road contractor in the area, had bought, and they wanted to have their men have some experience on the equipment. See, it was equipment that you couldn't buy during the war, World War II. So my dad had them there. It was an old brickyard at one time, and he had them level the brickyard, and also up on the other end, leveled part of the lower part of the gravel pit. And so immediately after they finished leveling that, then I started working the land up for spring seeding. And of course, at the time, this gravel pit was in the neighboring Zander's gravel pit. And on the map, you can see it was, it's a cucumber-sized gravel pit. And it's not very deep because it was mainly elongated hill of gravel that was taken out. So it was a flat bottom pit that was no more than about 6 or 8 feet deep from the surrounding area. And so as I'm only working on a field that's not much more than a block long, because of the river on the west. And see, the East Wind River flowed right through the middle of our farm, river valley. And so the river being on the west and the gravel pit being on the east. So as I'm coming up to the east toward the gravel pit, there was nothing there. And as I turned and returned back down to the river, the other end of the field, going west, then I reached the river and I turned to come back. And just that little while with my back turned, this UFO slipped in behind my back, and there it was, hovering ground level. And at first, my first reaction, now this was at night. In fact, it was quite late at night. I believe about 10:30 at night, which makes me think that the fact that I was that late out on the field, that I must have got a late start, which is uncommon. But being, I believe, that year it was Easter Sunday. So after you take my mother to church and have the Easter dinner, I got out there late in the afternoon. That way I would be working late into the night. And this Easter Sunday that year, it was on the 21st of April. of 1946. And that also happened to be my birthday, my 17th birthday. I was 17 at the time. So here this thing was sitting and hovering. My first reaction was, I must remind you that the media or the government hadn't acknowledged these things until a year and 2 months later. So I had no idea what I was dealing with. So my first reaction was, oh, it's probably car lights. The young people in those days used to frequent the gravel pit. I won't elaborate on that. So immediately when I spotted it, after I completed my turn, it was stationary, and then immediately started moving off to my left and heading due north, and moving slowly at first and rapidly picking up speed. And it was going at a slight incline, which the gravel pit road also inclines going out. But when it reached the top of the incline, I had two problems. That now it's continued to climb airborne, and the rapid speed it picked up. I believe within 30 seconds, this thing went from a standstill a block away to a pinpoint to infinity among the stars and gone. It just blew my mind. I had stopped the tractor in the middle of the field and watched it go. Just couldn't figure out what was possibly happening. You know, this was at a time when we just concluded World War II. We didn't have rockets. We didn't have helicopters. We didn't have jet planes or nothing like that. And to see something like that then, and I might even add, even today, 64 years later, we've been to the moon and back and to the outer planets. Our technology today would pale compared to what I saw on that day in 1946. And so you might wonder, what did I actually see? Well, I would have to say, on a real bright sunny day, when you look at these bright white clouds, they're soft looking, of course, and so it's a soft brightness. And you squint to look at them, that bright. Now, imagine it also, I should have added, this was a new moon that night, or at least it didn't come up until after 11 o'clock that night. In those days, the city lights didn't even glow in the sky. So in the country, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face when it was a black night like that. And so, and all the stars were out in all directions. We had clearer skies than before the jets. Now, if you can imagine such a black night, and it's all clear in the sky, and imagine something that bright in a typical saucer shape, and about 60 feet in diameter, plunge that into the blackness of night. That's what I was looking at. And it really shook me up. I mean, imagine something like that back then. And so after it was gone, I just sat there on a tractor looking at an empty spot in space, wondering what happened here. And so I was quite shooken up. So I didn't even pull to the end of the field. I pulled a pin in the middle of the field and headed the tractor home and to tell my dad what happened. And at the time, my dad said, "Oh, I've seen that." He says, "That's swamp gas." Well, I thought, "Oh, wow." And thought no more about it. We tended to believe our parents in those days and didn't think any more of it. And so, like I said, just concluded World War II, and this was on or about April 21st, 1946. So then the following January 8th, 1947, I left for the service. I was in the Army Engineers and out in Washington State at the place called Fort Worden. Now, I often mention this. There was this movie that was filmed there on location called An Officer and a Gentleman, and most people have seen that. Well, that was filmed on location years later there when it was deactivated into Fort Worden State Park and in 1953. Okay, so while I'm there, I remember in the news media there was now this is in this Seattle region, Mount Rainier to the east. A certain person by the name of what was his name? Kenneth Arnold. He was a fire extinguisher salesman for a company in Idaho, and he was on a trip to Chehalis, Washington. That's south of the capital of Olympia, of Washington. And he flew a small private plane on this trip. And on his way back, he spotted 9 discs in saucer-shaped discs in flight. And needless to say, they were going very fast. And so he radioed to the airport what was going on. So by the time he got to the airport and landed, the media was already there and they questioned him on this. So this was June 24th, 1947. And this was when the very date that the UFO thing became known to the general media. And obviously, if the government knew anything about these things before that, they didn't get there in time to cover that up. The media was there because they called the media. at the airport. So I thought that was fascinating, having had the experience myself. And I thought, oh, probably I'll soon know what this is all about. And so, okay, I waited patiently for the government to come out with what's going on. And exactly a week to 10 days later, that crash happened at Roswell. Now the government had it in their own lap. And now this, I'll get to Roswell later, but that's how the UFO thing got. Incidentally, the UFO thing was a later thing that at that time they called them flying saucers because they looked like a flying saucer. So after concluding 2 years in the service, and now I'm back home on the farm, and this was about a year later after I'm back home. So now it's 3 years after my first sighting on the farm. And it was a very warm summer evening, and probably around mid-July. And my dad was outside talking to a friend that had stopped in. It's after dark. And as we were standing there, looking to the southwest, what should arrive from the southeast, irregular shaped, orange-red colored cloud moving the speed of a breeze. Fire orange, you know. It was burning. And I says, what the heck is that? My dad says, swamp gas. Well, at that point, now after all 3 years thinking swamp gas, now I get to see the real thing, what is swamp gas. Incidentally, I have to explain, most people wouldn't probably know what swamp gas is. In fact, it's methane gas is given off by vegetation. So it's a very common gas. And but the thing that makes it rare is it rarely burns. So unless it happens to be burning, and it happens to be at night, and you happen to be looking at the right direction, all those parameters come into play. Well, knowing that, it's a situation where swamp gas is probably, in that sense, just as rare as UFOs. But a world of difference. We're talking about something moving with the speed of the breeze, and it's a burning cloud of gas. Whereas the UFO was a very well-defined shape saucer that, I might add, standing from the standing start when I first spotted it, increasing speed with a low attack to the north horizon, it traveled up to the point I think it reached the speed of a meteor. It's like a meteor in reverse, going up. And so now I know that the difference between swamp gas and UFOs. Well, that's about all I can say about the UFO sighting until many years later, I continued to follow whatever the government had to say on UFOs, which was not much. They were covering everything that was going on. And I might add, they're still covering after 64 years later. So this was the late 80s that 1987, 88 in there. My youngest daughter was in University of Maryland, and she was studying to be a molecular science of, they work with DNA and all that. And she's a senior scientist today. Well, at the time I visited her at college, I had the opportunity to travel to Washington, D.C. In fact, I made several trips to Washington, D.C., mainly as a tourist. And then at one point, I went through the what do they call that? Library of Congress. And now this is a big place. And since I've done a lot of research in the past, started research on genealogy, and that's what got me quite experienced with research. And so when I was in the Library of Congress, I thought, well, as long as I'm here, maybe I should research something. So I thought, well, what could I research? And all of a sudden I thought, well, I wonder what they got on UFOs. So I asked them at the desk what they had. And, well, after they brought a lot of stuff out, kind of like Mickey Mouse stuff, I thought, I don't need this. So then I asked them, I says, do you have the declassified documents files? Now, some people may not know what that is, but President Kennedy, when he was in office, decreed that anything over a certain date would be declassified, a blanket declassification. So that's what created the declassified documents files. And so I asked them if they had the declassified documents. Yes. So they told me where to go. I was used to people telling me where to go. Anyway, so it's a big place, so I had to go a block down a long corridor, and then turn right and go a block down another corridor, and then turn right again and go halfway down that corridor. And then there was an open door on the left, and I went in there, and there they had the declassified documents files. Now, they covered about 15 feet of shelving in a row. And they were like encyclopedias, a smaller encyclopedia. And there was one book for each year, for all the declassified documents for each year. So, having had my experience in 1946, I first looked at the book for 1947. And of course, I had to look under flying saucers because the UFO term wasn't invented yet. And so I found flying saucers in there, 1947. And so I thought that was quite interesting. And then I thought, well, did they have anything in 1946 when I had my experience? So I went back a year, 1946, there was nothing. So then I went ahead from 47 to 48 and 49. So 3 years in a row, 47, 48, and 49. Now, by that year, so much has been written and researched on UFOs that I didn't want to get into that. I just wanted to know, what did the government do the first 3 years? And so I copied the numbers for the file numbers and went to the file. I didn't want to tip off the librarian what I was really into, because I didn't know if they would be open to that. So I took the numbers and I just went to the file and I asked her which file had these numbers, and I went to that file and I found my own documents in there and took them out. Took them to the reading room, and they had machines that microfilm and microfiche and the like. So these were on microfiche. And so I started going through those files, and I can't believe how lucky I was at first shot. I apparently had the government's, when this Kenneth Arnold in Washington State, when he saw those 9 discs, well, it was a result of those 9 discs that the government decided we need information. So the government sent out 3 letters. 2 went to think tanks, the Rand Corporation in California, and I forget the other one, it was the Brookings Institute or something like that. And the 3rd one went to Dr. Alan Hynek. He was an astronomer, and he was hired by the government to investigate this. And so I read the 3 letters that were sent out, the 2 to the 2 think tanks and the 1 to the astronomer. And they were sent out soon after the June 24th incident with Kenneth Arnold. And they were asking for questions. What are we dealing with? Well, those letters weren't returned until about 3 months later. Now it's September. And so these letters that were sent back, that was very interesting. The letters dealt with well, they basically all had the same thing, but the conclusions were very similar. That at that particular time, they felt that in all probability, they're probably extraterrestrial. And what was most fantastic of all was one letter. Now, I don't know which think tank it was. One of the think tanks had sent a concluding chapter that stated, however, this information does not nothing on the Mexico incident. See, that hadn't happened yet when the letters went out. So this tells me that a week to 10 days after the Roswell thing, the Kenneth Arnold thing, they didn't, and they sent those letters out before the Roswell thing. And then, now you would think they would have shared that information if they were looking for information from two think tanks and an astronomer. But apparently they didn't, because it's stated that, however, this does not include any information from the more recent Roswell. They didn't say Roswell. They only said Mexico. Well, Roswell was the only thing going in Mexico. So I thought that was interesting. And so I thought, oh, it would be great to have copies of this. So, but time ran out, so I couldn't make copies that day anymore. So I had to come back another time for that. And so even if I would have gotten copies, I'm not sure if I would have got out the door with that kind of security. Well, so I come back at a later date, made my copies, and but what I really was looking for, those 3 letters, I needed to access again the declassified documents files. Those files were gone.
How much later was it that you went back?
Probably within a year or 2, I believe it was. And I don't think it was that same time. But when I went back, 15 feet of shelving of books were gone. All that was left of those declassified documents files were 3 books, taking that much shelf space. And, well, those 3 books wouldn't give me the information I needed. So I asked them, what happened to the rest of the books? And he says, oh, we never had those. They denied they ever existed. Well, I says, I saw those books. They were on the shelf here, and no, we never had them. So finally they sent me to see somebody higher up in the Library of Congress. And I got the same story there. I wasn't satisfied. So then they sent me all the way up to the top. And I got the same story there. No, we never had them. Well, I said there was this woman in the library. I didn't even get to finish my statement. Oh, she's not here anymore. At that point, I was afraid to ask any more questions, and I dropped it there. So I never got to see those documents again. But I memorized them quite well because I read them all. And so much for the Library of Congress. And what a disappointment that was. Well, then I went to the National Archives. And I signed in at the National Archives. So you had to sign up for a space, and I had when you sign up, you get a microfilm roll reader, and so I signed up, telling them that I was interested in genealogy. So they showed me where I had to go for that information I was looking at. So after looking at a few things, I got bored, and so I went into the archive room at the Library of Congress, and so I was nosing around, which I shouldn't have been. And just to give you an idea of the kind of stuff that was there was these regular, file cabinets, about 4 feet high, side by side, about 60 feet long. And what was in those files, all 60 feet of it, was all the files from Germany, Hitler's documents from World War II. And then toward the end, then they had the Nuremberg trials added yet, and they were there. So I was just nosing through the headings, because it's all in German. I don't read German very well. So I was just nosing through the headings to see what it was all there, and that was that. Then I nosed around other areas to see what was there, and then, of all things I would run across of main interest to me was this one file drawer, these big wide drawers with all the microfilm rolls in. I would guess there had to be at least 100 rolls to a drawer, and 3 drawers so there had to be over 300, guessing about 365 rolls and of microfilm. And this was of Project Blue Book. Project Blue Book was the Air Force's research on UFOs. They had earlier research groups that I think they first had Project Sign and I forget what, there's a couple more, but the more recent one was Project Blue Book, which lasted quite long. And so I thought, oh, this ought to be interesting. Now I got this microfilm reader that read those same rolls. So I helped myself to those rolls and found some pretty interesting stuff in there. And so I enjoyed myself. I wasn't bored anymore. And so then finally, when time was running out, I headed out. And I walked about 2 blocks, and then there was a stairway going down to the underground subway. And I got on the subway, and it wasn't even that subway right there. There was a cross subway. I went on the other one. And I got on that subway, and it was crowded, so it was standing room only. And so I'm standing there, and a guy comes up on my left, and, you know, nobody commonly talks to strangers on the subway in Washington. And he asked me, what am I doing in Washington? Oh, I says, I'm a tourist and visiting. One thing led to another, and he kept questioning, and finally it came out. He had followed me from the National Archives. Apparently they must have seen me nosing around, and they wanted to know what that was all about. I thought that was fascinating. Well, so that was the end of that. And so then when I left Washington, I traveled through West Virginia. I believe that was on Highway 50 heading west, the old Highway 50, not the interstates. And going through the East Coast mountains is pretty rugged there. And I ended up in this place in West Virginia. I don't remember offhand what town that was, but I remember reading about that they had a documented library on UFOs there. So I thought I would check that out passing through the area. So I stopped downtown, and there was this visitors bureau. I thought that's a good place for information. So I stopped there and asked where this place might be. Of course, they never heard of it. And, well, then he said a block away was the library. You might go over to the library and ask there. So I walked over to the library and went to the desk there, and and asked about it. Didn't know nothing about it. And so then, being like I usually am in a library, I got to nose around. So I'm nosing around, and finally this woman approaches me. Apparently she had overheard me at the desk. And she says, I know what you're looking for. She says, when they built this new library, they moved that into the old library, which is only about half a block away. Well, I thought that was strange that nobody in the Visitors Bureau or the library would know about this place. So this place was actually the library was in an old Civil War mansion. It was huge. And it was on the second floor of that mansion. So I got up to the second floor, no elevator. And so there they checked in, and they had files there, and all UFO files that they had. And so anyway, I looked through those files, and there was some pretty interesting stuff there. And through the years, it was built up, and but was more interesting. I'm a little bit ahead of myself. When I arrived there, it was closing time, so I didn't get to the library that night. So just to kill a few hours overnight, being alone, I wasn't gonna spend my money on a hotel room. So the interstate highway was on the outskirts of town. Till I took the interstate and got off at the rest stop, and parked my car and thought I'd spend the night there, which I did. And then in the middle of the night, I went to the center to use the restroom, and walked in to the restroom, and I heard some talking behind a partition, and so when I looked around to see what was going on, there was a guy there talking on a walkie-talkie of the day. And then he reached down and pulled up a drain and make like they're working on the drain. Well, I thought, well, so that's their business. So then I walked out into the visitor room with all the maps on the walls and everything, and I thought, I'll get myself clued in where I have to go in the morning on that map. So I was studying that map over in the corner, and now this guy that was in the restroom talking on that walkie-talkie, now he's in the background and in the visitor center, and then all of a sudden, out of the clear blue, now I'm the only person there. Nobody else. Just this guy and me. And all of a sudden, you know, usually they're quite garbled, those walkie-talkies, but all of a sudden it came through loud and clear. Is that guy still there yet? Apparently they were concerned about me. And I turned around and the guy looked kind of shocked. And then he went outside with it and before he responded. And I thought to myself, well, that's curious. So then I walked out to my car and now I wasn't sure what I should do. I mean, here we're in the 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, and they have concerns there about me. So I thought, well, maybe I should leave. Then I thought, no, I don't want to be out alone on that highway because if they would follow me. So then I decided to stay where I was. And then in the morning, when it was daylight, and I was getting ready to clean up and go for my appointment, and I'm walking to the restroom in the visitor center, and I look across the freeway, and here's a big sign on the top of the mountain. Future home of the Central Intelligence Agency, of all things. Well, so then I left there, and then I'm back to where I picked up at the library there, and so after I satisfied myself there, then I went on, and so then I headed for home, back to Wisconsin, and so after that, you know, I was retired and had time to travel. So I decided to follow up on this Roswell thing in New Mexico. So I had read in the Milwaukee Journal an article about 2 guys that were into researching UFOs. They were from La Crosse. So, nothing else to do. I traveled all the way to La Crosse to meet with these guys. And then I traveled to, when I was there, we had we met at one of the guys' houses, and we had quite a meeting there, a group of guys, about a half a dozen of us, and had a nice talk on it. Well, then they told me about a certain guy, a researcher, by the name of Don Schmidt. He was from Germantown, just northwest of Milwaukee, And they said he was researching this, a group of that he was with was researching this UFO thing at Roswell. Follow up on that. So then I traveled to Germantown, and just immediately out of Germantown to the west, this Don Schmidt was on the Homestead Farm, and it was like a hobby farm there, you know, and he had built a new house, and the farmhouse was still there, but he built a new house alongside. And so I stopped there, and there didn't seem to be anybody around, and then as I was driving out past the old farmhouse, this woman came out, and she says, "You looking for Don?" And I said, "Yeah." She says, "Well, he's delivering mail, but he should be home shortly if you want to wait." So I waited, and pretty soon Don arrived, and so we went in his new house, and he had a nice office all fixed up and decorated, and kind of neat. So then we had a long discussion there, just like we are here, and I talked all about my experience back when I was 17 years old, and they were, like I said, they were researching in Roswell, and he happened to be. I was lucky to catch him home because he spent a lot of time in Roswell. And so then my curiosity was raised. Now I got to go to Roswell. So this would have been starting in the early 90s. And incidentally, this research group hadn't concluded yet, so I spent the next 5 or 6 years in Roswell. I would always spend about 2 or 3 months every winter down in Roswell, and this research was ongoing at the time. So okay. I traveled to Roswell. I had bought myself a travel trailer, and I pulled that down. And now my daughter, the one that was in college in University of Maryland, that was such a new field, that DNA thing at that time, that was the only college that was teaching that. So she was in on the ground floor on that. So now she ends up in San Diego, California, working for Scripps Research Institute. That's very big out there. And so I would go out and visit her out there at Christmas. So I would pull my trailer down to Roswell, New Mexico, park it in storage for $1 a day. It wasn't bad then. And I left it there, and then went on to California and spent Christmas with my daughter. And then on the way back through, I pulled my trailer out of storage and stayed there for 2 or 3 months, and then back to Wisconsin in the spring. I did that several years. Well, that first time I went to Roswell, wasn't when I had that trailer yet. I had done my first trip on Amtrak, and I got on Amtrak at Milwaukee and went the northern route all the way to Seattle, Washington. There I got off of Amtrak and had a rent-a-car arranged, and so with this rent-a-car, I drove to Fort Worden, that place I talked when I was in the service. Now I'm going back there about 45 years later. And so I get to Fort Worden, and I got there, and they had a museum there, because now it's a Fort Worden State Park, having been changed over to a state park in 1953 after the war. So they had information about the Coast Guard and the Coast Artillery, and nothing about the Army Engineers that I was connected with. So I asked the park ranger, "Oh, what about the Army Engineers that were here?" He looked at me kind of strange. What engineers? He knew nothing about the Army Engineers. Well, that gets to be a long story, because the commanding general at the time I was there at Fort Worden called me in his office and said, "We're going to be shipping out into the Pacific, and if you want to go with the guys, you're going to have to sign up for 2 more years." Well, I said, "Where exactly are we going, and what are we going to be doing?" He says, "I can't tell you that." Well, I thought that was strange. It was peacetime between World War II and Korea. So I ended up, my brother being in World War II, and talked about what a hellhole that was in the Pacific. So I didn't sign up. So I didn't end up going with the guys over to Eniwetok. They built the atomic bomb proving grounds. And there was a 3-bomb test series done in the spring of 1948. April 15th, May 1st, and May 15th. Bang, bang, bang. They kept them there as guinea pigs. All my buddies, they're all dead from the radiation years later. So little did I know how important that decision was, but I didn't find out till years later that that was all top secret. So when I got with the Army Engineers at Fort Worden, they had just moved up from California. I thought this was going to be their new home after World War II. What it was they're still today stationed in California, their home base. When they moved up to Fort Worden, that was to be their jump-off point for Eniwetok in the Pacific, because this was the follow-on of the Manhattan Project. some people may not know about the Manhattan Project. Well, the Manhattan Project was a secret group that built the atomic bomb that they dropped on Japan. And so 3 new bombs they built since the war, and now these are the hydrogen bombs, the big ones. And so anyway, these were being tested, and so I didn't know what happened over there, but the only reason I'm sitting here is because I didn't sign up for that 2 years. Well, so then I went to Fort Lewis outside of Seattle, or Tacoma, Washington. That's where I took my basic training before Fort Wharton. And there was a museum there, and it was closed because of that particular date. I think it was on a Monday they're closed. So I walked around the museum, and there was a door open, and I went in, and my luck, it was the Army National Research Center. So I went upstairs, and there was an open door, and walked in, and well, they said, I said I wanted to do some research, and well, they says, you can have that desk. He says, that guy isn't in today. He's gone to a funeral. So that was nice. So I started going through all the, now I'm researching this hydrogen bomb thing that our group was involved with. And I couldn't find nothing, and then I said to the guy, I said, I can't believe this. Here we apparently made history, and you have nothing on it. And I explained what it was. Oh, he says, we wouldn't have that here. He says, you got to go to the Atomic Energy Commission Center. Well, wow, that was the end of that. Well, then I went back, and finally I got back on the train and headed down the coast to San Diego, where my daughter was. They picked me up at the train station and spent Christmas there. That was my first Christmas there, but that was with Amtrak. Well, then after Christmas, then I got back on the Amtrak, and now I'm heading the southern route back to Chicago, heading toward Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I got off the Amtrak there and got on another rent-a-car. Then I drove down to Roswell, and I drove down Interstate 25 south, and then I forget what, 295 or whatever that was, going east toward Roswell. And then I passed a town, a little dinky town, you blink your eyes, you missed it, Bingham. And 20 miles south of Bingham is the Atomic Research Center, where they tested the first atomic bomb before they dropped on Japan. That was the test site. But of course that wasn't open at that time. At a later date I got there. So I thought I would check that out. Well, then I continued on to Roswell, and so I spent some time there, and I spent time at if you want to get this.
You want to hold it straight?
No. This is the UFO museum.
Okay.
At Roswell. In fact, there's two of them there. This was a city museum, and then there was a private one also. So that was that. And then I talked about this Don Schmidt from Germantown that was researching that. That's Don Schmidt there.
Yep, that's better.
Okay.
Okay.
And then here is at the City Museum, the director of the City Museum was this Walter Hawk. Now, he was with the Air Force public information officer that released the UFO incident in 1947, in or about July 4th, 1947. And this other guy here was with the radio station owner. And many is the time I got to talk to these two guys in the office there. So I was pretty much first person history picking up here. And this is the beginning of the cover-up. They tried to, when they got to the commanding general of the Air Force, they displayed a weather balloon, which was a joke. And so that's so much for that. And this now, this is the crash site at Roswell, in the desert. This gouge here is this is the gouge here where the crash occurred. And this is about 80 miles northwest of Roswell. And okay, so where was I? So I go to that museum, meet with Walter Haught. He was originally from Chicago, and when he was in the Air Force, he ended up out there. And incidentally, he was quite involved. That first bombs, when they had those two bombs left that they didn't drop on Japan, they had used them in the Pacific. And he was the one who flew the plane that dropped that atomic bomb in the islands out there. So I'm talking a guy that's pretty high here. Now, Then I also visited the other museum, John Price, who had a private museum, which was near the entrance to the old Air Force base there. And so I would busy myself between the two museums, and but surprisingly, they weren't very open. They because of government secrecy and the threat on their life, or the loss of all their benefits, Social Security, retirement, and all this, they were very tight-lipped on it. And but John Price on the private museum was a little bit more open because he wasn't involved with the Air Force. But anyway, so my interest was to get out in that desert and be at the actual site. So one day, a guy from the city museum, a guy that befriended me, that worked as a volunteer at the city museum, and incidentally, by coincidence, he ended up out there in the 1970s. He was from Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, and I forget his name offhand. And so he suggested that we might go out in the desert to that crash site. Oh, that would be great, I thought. So on the way, we stopped at the Bureau of Land Management. That's a government, all the land in the desert, that's under the Bureau of Land Management. And we got a big map from them, and they had it marked clearly on the map, a debris field about 3/4 of a mile long on from a northwest to a south east direction. So now we're traveling out into the desert, and incidentally, they mentioned to him, if you run across any caves out there, which there are a lot of caves, please let us know, because we're trying to record all the caves. And if the cave was already marked, then they usually had about 4 feet high a pyramid of stone. That was to mark that that's a marked cave. Registered. Okay.
I have about 5 minutes of battery left.
What?
I have about 5 minutes of battery left.
Oh. So, okay. So after 3 trips in the desert, I finally was able to get to the site. The first trip, we were perhaps within 2 miles. See, they wouldn't even, the Bureau of Land Management wouldn't even mark the spot where it actually happened. So the second trip, I went alone. And being from Wisconsin, I didn't know any better. Going out in the desert with no food or water and traveling alone, no cell phone or nothing like that then, that was a foolish thing to do. And I traveled out there the second trip because John Price in the private museum when I showed him that first trip, oh, he says, that's not it. He says, but he wouldn't tell me where it was. But he said, you're within a couple of miles. Well, I knew where the Foster Ranch was, so I kind of figured out where I should be. So that second trip, I went out there alone, and I traveled to that area. And then I came back to Roswell. And then finally, I made a third trip. Because when I was in the museum at John Price, he had pictures on the wall, a bunch of pictures, of that research team that was in the desert. And one of the pictures had some debris in the background that looked familiar, that I thought I'd seen that. And so now I had to make a third trip to check that out. So I made the third trip into the desert. Again, no food and water. And I parked on top of this plateau. Now at this point, I can look 50 miles in all directions, and there's nothing but desert. And no compass, but my only direction was, there was about 50 miles to the south was the mountain range, which so I knew that was due south. Well, now I started walking to the west, and after walking about 20, 30 minutes, I couldn't see my car anymore. And all of a sudden, I hear, I look up, and there was a couple of turkey buzzards circling. This guy is in trouble. Well, that really shook me up. I thought, what the heck am I doing out here? And so that was what really jarred me into reality about being out there alone in the desert with no food or water. And I told nobody I was going to be out there. And so it wasn't too long after that, I reached the crest of that, because I wanted to be at the top of that cliff. And here I find that debris of a very old windmill and an old tank and stuff from way back, that was collapsed, and all. So that confirmed I was on the right track. So I was actually at that site next to that, where I showed you that gouge next to that rock drop off there. And so I was satisfied. I achieved my goal.